Hello, and welcome back to Gates to Chaos, where we discuss the paranormal, magic, and all things that go bump in the night. I'm your host, the Gatekeeper. I want to start today's episode by saying that, from here on out, I'm going to try and include what particular gate will be opening in the title of the episode, so those more inclined to listen to the paranormal won't have to wade through the magic podcasts if they don't wish to. And those that strictly want to listen to the discussions on magic won't have to listen to the spirit world side of things. Though, why any practitioner wouldn't also want to hear about spirits is beyond me, as being a practitioner is to straddle the wall and have a foot in both worlds, but I digress. The gate we'll be opening today will be one that's a bit of a combination, both paranormal and magic. The gate of the past. The reason I decided to set off on this path of magic, the Shadow Man. As I discussed in the introduction episode, I have been plagued by paranormal encounters ever since I was very young. I don't know if it started with the Shadow Man or not, but I do know that he was a constant tormentor for as far back as I can remember. To start where this began, we have to go back 20 some odd years in my life, to the time when my family resided in North Carolina. My father was stationed at Fort Bragg, and I was at the age where people finally start having long-term memories they can recall in their adult years. Though this varies for many people, I know I was around 3 when he first started making his appearances. We would go visit my mother's parents on the weekends, and their stonework home they resided in was fairly famous in the area for their yard sales and my grandfather's apple sales. We would go and help during these events, and though I loved my grandparents, I always hated that house. The second floor just had this feel to it. The porcelain cat figurines creeped me out. The storage room with its many books creeped me out, though even at that age I loved pulling the books out to look at them. And the 2 rooms on either side, with their ancient beds and furniture, as if a drop of time was displaced and frozen from my mother's childhood, they definitely creeped me out. I would hear things while I was there. I would feel things, but it kicked up a notch when I started to see things during the day. We were outside, helping with the yard sale, when I looked up to the single window from the second floor that looked out onto the yard. It was the room with all the books that I would spend most of my time if I was forced to be upstairs when my parents collected things to use for yard sale that day. In that window, I saw the figure of a man, tall, which most of my family is not, broad, but there was always something twisted about him, something wrong I couldn't put my finger on during all of my life. I turned to my mother and asked what man was in the house. This obviously freaked her out a bit, and she sent my father to investigate. Of course, there was no one in the house, and they hadn't seen the man in the window, so I was just a hyperactive little kid with an imagination. It might be a little too soon in my story, but it was around that time my parents decided to never believe me when I would run to them crying about seeing something. By age 6, I just learned to keep my mouth shut. That man, though, he never left. I would start to see him at our house at night. I was terrified of my closet, though I and my parents could never figure out why. And I always had to have the doors open so I could see inside. This is something I still do as an adult, as it helps me sleep. Because to my child brain, once those doors shut, what was behind them became entirely up for debate. They could become a gate to somewhere else, and things could come through. I started having a recurring nightmare of some tall, man in a lab coat chasing me as a child. I would run from room to room, trying to rouse my family, but none of them would wake. I would always run to my older sister's room, whom I was close with at the time, and dive into her mound of stuffed animals to hide myself, or under her bed. He always found me, though. It was to the point where I would not go to sleep without the overhead lights on and wrap myself up in a cocoon of my blanket, with only my nose poking out for air. It didn't matter how sweaty I got, how absolutely sweltering it was inside that damned blanket. I would not risk having any extremity outside of it, so they couldn't grab me. I never knew if I was a sickly child, or if it was a combination of the lack of sleep and anxiety, but during the time of my nightmares, I would frequently wake up to promptly vomiting all over myself and my sheets. I'm sure my mother dreaded whenever I would wake, due to the mess that was there more often than not. During all this time, the man made his regular showings, mostly at my grandparents' house, but also at our own. I was terrified of the dark, and couldn't sleep without the overhead light on. Finally, we moved out of that house and that area, as we went across the world to live in Hawaii for a time. I was excited for a new start, and hopefully get away from the weird stuff in that house and that blasted man. Unfortunately, I was proven wrong. In our new home on base, I found new things to be terrified of. Thankfully, the recurring nightmares stopped, but I would lie awake at night in the bed that I had to share with my younger brother, and I would watch people materialize in the doorway, walk over to our closet, turn, leave, and disappear before reaching the light in the hallway. Though I was terrified of these people, they almost never looked at me. There was a female soldier in modern BDUs at the time. She looked at me before walking out the door. An old-timey nurse, countless men. The rest of them, it was like they were on loop. Then one day, either in first or second grade, they had taken us on a field trip in school to where they had built some World War II bunkers that had never seen any action. I noticed that there were these kids in the bunkers that kept beckoning for us to come play. When I told the tour guide that there were kids also over there, but they didn't like the light, he didn't let me leave his side again until the tour was over. When we got closer to a fishing pond that predated the World War II construction, he told us the story of the Minahune, little men that would turn to stone if caught by the light. They, supposedly, had built the pond. Though I kept having these strange occurrences, I thought I had finally escaped the Shadow Man, until one night, us Army brat kids were playing manhunt around the neighborhood, which was kind of like a tactical version of tag and hide and go seek with two teams, and the purpose was not to let the other team find everyone. It was something we'd play while our parents got drunk, barbecued, and gathered around the fire pit. I was a little older now, possibly 8 or so, and I was on my own. My team had left me, so I decided to find my own hiding spot and laugh when I was the last one to be found. I climbed up in a bush and settled myself in the dense foliage, looking out through an opening in the leaves. And that's when I saw him. He was standing next to the side of one of the buildings, staring at my hiding spot. He started walking towards me, and when he got near a pool of light from the building, I saw that this man had no features. I knew who he was, and I bolted from my hiding spot, ran to my parents, and didn't play anymore that night. Though someone else in my family did finally have an experience at that location. It was my younger brother, who was using the toilet when he burst out of the bathroom with his pants around his ankles screaming like a madman. While he was doing his business, a shampoo bottle flew from the bathtub and slammed against the wall next to him with enough force that it got shampoo all over the wall. We laughed about it at the time, but he was obviously freaked out. Thinking about it now, I should have known not to have laughed at something like that, as someone else finally had something that I was used to have happening to me. Fast forward when we moved to Missouri. I was a very young teen now, and we were excited at having a new home our parents had bought. Not long after we got settled in though, he made his first appearance. I woke up and he was standing by my bed, looking down at me. I screamed and he jumped through the doorway, slamming the door in the process. My father was absolutely beside himself with how mad he was. "There's no such thing! It's all in your head! How many times do I have to tell you?" It wasn't a nightly thing, but it was often enough that my initial reaction was to no longer scream. I would start, and upon seeing me stare at him, he would leave. Never one to talk about my experiences anymore. I found it funny my sister would talk about how creepy the utility room in the basement was. She had occupied the largest room in the basement, which was right next to the utility room that had the space underneath the stairs. I was also creeped out by that room, but that's because that's where he stayed under the stairs. Her and I would both dash in, grab what we needed, and dash out, with many hurried looks towards the space under the stairs. Once I entered high school, I finally had made several friends to call my own, and out of sheer need to be like them, who was an atheist and an agnostic, I tried to convince myself that I was crazy, and it was all in my head. It didn't help that once I finally hit puberty at age 16, he started to get more intense. I would wake up nightly around 3 a.m. to find him over me. I would constantly orient myself to sleep facing the door so I could see if it was open the minute I woke up. Well, one night, I woke up on the floor, facing the wall opposite the door. I was groggy and didn't realize what was amiss at first, until something yanked me back towards the now open door. I screamed that time. My sister moved out once I was 17, and I took over her room in the basement next to where he stayed. During all this time, I kept telling myself I was crazy. I kept telling myself that he didn't exist. I wanted so badly to be normal. Usually, I would just try to ignore it. One day, I was sitting on my bed with our Shar-Pei Pit Bull mix. Sweetest dog ever, but had a mean growl. It was during the day, and myself and the dogs were the only ones home. My parents were in Washington, Missouri at a football game for my younger brother. We started to hear these heavy footfalls upstairs on the main floor. I thought that my parents had just gotten home, that the game was over, that they had left early or something. Whoever was walking made their way towards the top landing where the basement stairs came out in the dining room. Slowly, they started to walk down the stairs with real heavy, deliberate footsteps. This was something that my father would often do just to try to freak me out. I called out, "Ha ha, very funny, I know it's you," but he didn't say anything. The footfalls continued down. Thump, thump, thump. Where the stairs end is right at my open door. If anyone was there, there's not enough room for them to hide. When the footsteps got to the bottom of the stairs, my doorway was empty. My dog, staring at the doorway, starts to slowly rise up. She lets loose one of her meanest growls when suddenly 3 heavy knocks slammed against my door, causing it to bounce off of the wall. My dog was beside herself. She was barking. I was freaking out. I didn't know what to do. I tried to think that somehow someone was just playing a prank on me. We didn't hear any footsteps going back up the stairs, so I exited the room with my dog in tow, and I walked across the hall to the game room, where the only bathroom was. I checked under the pool table, no one was there. I checked in the shower, no one was there. I checked behind all the doors, and no one was there. I started to go into the utility room, the room I was most dreading, when she stopped at the doorway, stared at the space underneath the stairs, and started to growl again. I decided nope, right on out. I took her and the other 2 dogs, and we waited outside until my parents got home. Of course, when I told them that I thought someone was in the house, they rolled their eyes and they laughed. By the time I turned 18, he was still making his nightly occurrences. I'd wake up every night around 3 a.m. and he'd be standing over my bed. It was to the point where I was desperate. I still thought I was crazy until I met others that could see the same stuff I did and unprompted describe the spirits. So instead of thinking I was crazy, I decided to look into other methods of how to get rid of him. Ever since I was young, I used to pray to the Christian God, just wanting to be normal. Please make me normal. Those prayers were never answered. So I decided to go down another path, as one of the people that I had met was into witchcraft and that sort of thing. I picked up my first book, which was Scott Cunningham's Guide for the Solitary Practitioner, something that most of us, at least in my generation, started with. I started looking up spells on how to get rid of spirits and unwanted presences, and I found one that involved a bowl of water and a candle. So I decided to give it a go. I was in my room in the dead of night. I had cast my first circle. I had taken a candle and I had melted the bottom of it a bit so that way it would adhere to the bottom of the bowl. Surrounding the candle, I filled the bowl with water to about maybe 2 inches or so from the top of the candle. The gist of the spell is you call out to the entity you're wanting to get rid of, and you basically fuse their essence with the flame, telling them that as the flame grows, so would that entity's power, just as a kind of like bait to get them to agree, I guess. I don't know. I googled this spell. Don't judge me. I was young and dumb and desperate back in the day. Then as the candle burns and it gets close to the water, eventually the water would snuff it out, and thus snuffing out your problem. So on that night, in my circle, I called out to the man that followed me my entire life. I never knew his name. I didn't give him a name. I just simply called out to him. I told him that that candle, that flame, represented him. And as the flame grew, so would his power. And I envisioned his shadow essence just infusing that candle. In retrospect, I probably shouldn't have picked such a big candle. I was in my circle for quite a while. I finally watched as that candle made its way to the water level, holding my breath, wishing for the flame to go out. But it didn't. It sank below the water, somehow forming a wall of very thin wax around it. Which, I'm sorry, the flame should have melted that thin wall regardless. The flame made its way maybe a centimeter down, when finally physics won out. The heat managed to melt a thin layer of wax on one of the sides, and I saw the first bit of water start to pour in, when suddenly the candle shot straight up in the air, turned, and fell into the water. I don't know if the water put out the flame or it was out before it hit the water. But I do know that he was no longer in the house. Directly after that ritual, I hung up protective sachets around my room just to keep him out. But my sister wasn't creeped out by the utility room anymore. I never saw him in the house. But I did know that he wasn't completely gone. I would still see him on roads at night, watching my car as I drove by, running next to the car from the woods. It wasn't until I got a little bit of experience under me, nothing compared to my over a decade now, but I finally bound him, and I haven't seen him since. I hope not to. And ever since that night, I've never looked back. I've never wanted to go back to Christianity, which is what I was raised with. From that day on, I was a practitioner, and there was no changing it, because finally I could do things to let myself sleep at night, so at least I didn't see things in my own home. So that's it. That's the long story of the reason why I started practicing magic. Before I go, I want to give a massive shout out to my friend who's helped me pick out the music for this podcast, helped with name generations, and just been very supportive. You know who you are. This would not have happened without you, and I am very grateful that I have a friend like you in my life. And listeners, if you have any stories about a similar figure of the Shadow Man or any entities that you want to share, please send them to my email, gates.to.chaos@gmail.com. That's gates.to.chaos@gmail.com. And I would love to feature them on this show. Stay safe, stay sane, and stay magical. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.